record here. Start admitting everybody. We're good live on Facebook now.
Hello, Facebook people.
Give everybody a chance to get on here. All right, and here we go. Welcome again to another Frightmare Before Christmas author event at a Free Thinkers Corner, broadcasting live from, well, once again, my house. Today we have author Matt Bechtel. He has numerous collections and anthologies. His first collection, published collection, is Monochromes and Other Stories. Another one is called Wicked Haunted. He's also the editor of Dystopian States of America. And he's also the chairperson of the Camp Nikon conventions. For those of you who have joined us both on on Zoom, if you keep your video off and your mic off, that'll keep down confusion, but we may ask you to come up at some point. Use the chat box, please, for any questions or comments. I'll relay them to Matt, unless he has the chat up and he wants to answer them on his own. For those of you on Facebook Live, feel free to use the comment section and I'll relay your questions to Matt. Matt, thanks for joining us.
It is my pleasure, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. It is great to be part of this series.
Right. Go right ahead. Whatever you'd like to do. I think you wanted to read a...
Yeah, I'd like to actually kick things off by reading a story that I think most people have probably missed out on because it was published in an anthology put out by PS Publishing in the UK. But before I do, I already see that Tony Trembley's here. And Tony, your event last night was awesome. And I believe you name dropped Chris Golden 18 or 19 times in 90 minutes. So I'd like to humbly suggest, as I pour myself a drink out of this gorgeous decanter that was a Christmas gift 2 years ago from my even more gorgeous wife, Sheri, that tonight we play the Frightmare Before Christmas drinking game, and everyone take a drink every time Chris Golden's name gets said. It's a good thing that Rio yours isn't here, or we'd all be sloshed in 20 minutes. So to get things off rolling, I'd like to read my contribution to the anthology 10-Word Tragedies, which was edited by Tim Levin and, you guessed it, Christopher Golden. Cheers, everybody. We're not really going to drink every time I say Chris, or we're not going to get through this intro. Chris became friends with the musician Frank Turner. And if you've never appreciated Frank's music, I can't recommend him highly enough. For my money, he's the best wordsmith in music today. His lyrics are unbelievable. And the first verse of a song titled Mittens on his album, Positive Songs for Negative People, opens like this. Wandering lonely through the snow streets of New York, I stumbled on a thrift store that sold postcards by the yard. I bought a mile and took them home so I could read 10,000 10-word tragedies, the lives these strangers lead, to remind myself the things I need. Chris complimented Frank on those lyrics, and Frank was like, oh, that's a true story. I actually have a box of all these postcards. And Chris's brain went nuts, and he's like, send them to me and Tim Levin. We'll send postcards to authors, and they'll use those postcards as inspiration to write stories for this anthology. Side note, Frank then said, great, can I write a story too? And Chris was like, have you ever written fiction before? And Frank said, no, but I've always wanted to. His is the last story in here, and it is unfucking believable. So, goes to show. The postcard that I chose, because they sent me 3 to choose from, and one was quite honestly pretty vapid, and the second one was terrific, but the third was so intriguing to me because it mentioned a letter from Elsie, and I found myself just thinking over and over again, what was in that letter? And the full text of the postcard appears in the story. I'll just leave it at that. The postcard was postmarked from Oakland, California in 1944. So with that backdrop, I'd now like to read my contribution to 10-Word Tragedies, The Letter from Elsie. Harold was so preoccupied by the letter that he almost stepped into the path of a forklift. "Whoa, son," the driver shouted, his thick southern accent cutting through the early morning mist on the docks. "You all right?" "Yes, sir," Harold replied to the man, who was grimy and sweaty and looked like he'd already worked a full shift despite the early hour. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get in your way." The workman produced a red bandana from his pocket and wiped his brow and bald scalp. "You ain't no bother," he said. "Come to look at the boats?" Ozarks, Harold thought. His city had attracted so many poor migrant workers from the South that he'd come to be able to identify subtle differences in their dialects. Arkansas, probably? "I like to come watch the ships get built," Harold confessed. "I hope you don't mind." "Mind," the man laughed. "You know where those ships are headed, son?" Harold hated being called son by a stranger, but he recognized it was just a regional peccadillo and the man meant no offense. Plus, he knew he had a baby face that made him look much younger than he was. With a smile, he pointed out towards the Pacific Ocean. "That-a-way," Harold said. "West." "Nah, son," the worker beamed. "They're going to save the world." Harold nodded and stuffed his hands into his pants pockets, slightly crumpling the folded envelope within. He forced a smile before responding, "Thank you. Thank all of you for what you're doing here. Just doing our part, all any of us can do. We have to win this war." "That's true," Harold agreed. "We do have to win this war. You're absolutely right about that." The man studied Harold for a moment as if he recognized that there was something being left unsaid. In the end, he decided to simply end their conversation with a wave and a smile. "Y'all enjoy the rest of your morning," he said, "and God bless." "Thank you," Harold replied. "You too." The dock worker vanished amidst the din and movement of heavy machinery, and Harold returned his gaze to the harbor. He hadn't lied. He did like watching the work at the shipyards, and he appreciated the navy that was birthed on the docks of his city. And it was true that they had to win the war in the Pacific. Still, there's something about that very phrase, the war in the Pacific, that never failed to catch in Harold's throat. Part of him simply couldn't comprehend the irony of those two words in such close proximity. It was just one more equation that his mind couldn't balance, no matter how hard he tried. Which brought him back to the letter. It should have been so simple. After all, he'd been anticipating it for 5 years. Yet here he was, nearly 18 hours after retrieving it from his on-campus P.O. box, just as petrified as when he'd opened it. The sleepless night that followed the envelope's arrival led him to call in sick to the lab and hop the K-line downtown. It wasn't the first time he'd played hooky in an attempt to clear his head, but not even his favorite city could quiet the question that screamed within his mind. What am I going to tell Elsie? Harold's head throbbed, an affliction caused by lack of clarity, sleep, and caffeine. At least the third had an easy remedy. The noise around him gradually subsided as Harold wandered farther from the docks. He was halfway to his destination when a new question crashed his inner interrogation. Why had the letter taken so long to arrive? It was postmarked the 15th, yet hadn't reached him until the 24th. Even crossing the country, letters from Jersey usually only took 3 or 4 days. Why the delay? Were they monitoring his mail? Had they read Elsie's letter? If he sent a response from campus, would they read it? No, the sensible part of his mind said. You're being paranoid. You're a scientist, goddammit. Where's your evidence? Letters get delayed sometimes, especially cross country. You have no reason to believe they're spying on you. You're just sleep deprived. Stop imagining things. Still, he couldn't help but wonder. A red light stopped him half a block from Sophie's at the corner in front of Aoki's Market. Harold used to buy fruit there all the time, as Mr. and Mrs. Aoki always had the freshest produce in all of Oakland. But the boarded-up store had been in stasis for 2 years, ever since its owners had been shipped 5 hours north to Lake Tule. Even the huge sign Mr. Aoki had hung over his market's double doors proclaiming, "I am an American," had grown stale. The familiar door chime and the smell of coffee and hash browns welcomed Harold as he slipped through the front door of Sophie's. Its namesake proprietor, who acted as the unofficial mayor and den mother of the neighborhood, looked up from wiping the counter when she heard the delicate bell. Her warm smile belied her greeting. Not you again. Don't tell me. Another sleepless night, Harold? He smiled and slid onto a red vinyl stool 2 down from a young black man. 1 bottomless cup of your finest coffee, Miss Sophie. Sophie pointed at him with a wise finger. You need something to eat, too. Harold shook his head. I'm not hungry. That wasn't a question, young man, she declared, bringing him a menu. Order something or you'll eat what I bring you. He lowered his voice as Sophie filled his coffee mug. I've got no appetite. Not sure I could stomach much of anything right now. That bad, huh? Harold nodded. Want to talk about it? She whispered. I so do, he told her. But you know I can't. Yeah, I know, she said. So have an omelet or a plate of hash. Harold shook his head. Sophie studied him. Blueberry pancakes? His eyes fell. Not until I know, Sophie cut him off. Just thought I'd try because I know they were your favorite. Still are, Harold said, and you know it's nothing against your pancakes. Child, they were my neighbors for 22 years, Sophie said in a hushed voice that still somehow managed to sound like she was yelling. And I admire your loyalty. But not eating fruit or taking a bestseller off my menu ain't going to bring them home any sooner. Harold nodded and eyed the large cake plate under a glass dome. He pointed and asked, You baked those this morning? Sophie leaned across the counter and tousled his prematurely thinning sandy hair. You've been coming here 6 years and you actually got to ask if my corn muffins are fresh. One, please, he ordered, with butter. And I'll need cream and sugar, she finished for him, probably enough to rot your teeth. He grinned. Hey, you better know how I take my coffee after 6 years. Sophie slipped back to her kitchen to retrieve the cream and butter just as the doorbell chimed again. 4 dock workers, younger than the one Harold had spoken with earlier, but all at least a decade older than himself, filed through the front door, continuing their conversation from the walk from the pier. Alabama, Harold thought, just as their chattering voices stopped. Their sudden silence deadened the room like a dropped sledgehammer. Harold craned his neck to see the dock workers staring through him at the young man 2 stools down. And the young man had looked up from his scrambled eggs to return the favor. Ain't worth it, one of the workers finally said, slinking past the counter on his way towards a booth. As his compatriots followed, the third in line paused in front of the stool between Harold and the young black man, glowering over them both. Then he eyed Sophie, who had returned from the kitchen and was gathering menus to bring them. He took one look at her complexion and declared, God, shit like this makes me miss home. The young man bristled and Sophie's eyes grew wide and nervous. Before they could do or say anything, Harold rose from his stool. He removed his eyeglasses, wiped them on his shirt tails, and returned them to the bridge of his nose as he reached for his wallet. Gentlemen, he announced before the Southerners had sat down, let me buy your breakfast. The 4 dock workers stopped in their tracks. Pardon? One asked. Let me buy your breakfast this morning, Harold repeated. Call it a thank you for the work you're doing building ships for the Navy. He produced a $5 bill and their jaws dropped in unison. This should more than cover it, and you guys can split the change between yourselves. The workers looked to each other, a mixture of happy and confused and surprised. Well, the oldest declared as he reached for the money, this is, Harold snapped back his arm and held the bill towards the door. Elsewhere, he said. There's another diner a block and a half down across the street. If you reach the movie theater, you've gone 2 doors too far. Take the money and leave. Now wait just a goddamn minute, the loudest one tried to protest, but Harold would have none of it. That woman behind the counter, that's her name on the door. And the young man you seem to have such a problem with, he'll be sailing one of the ships you're building soon enough to go fight the war you're not fighting in. But most of all, I haven't slept, my head is killing me, and I just want to drink my coffee in peace. So like I said, take the money and leave. Go have a free breakfast. Just have it down the street. The bill flopped in Harold's fingers like a limp exit sign. Slowly and with dagger eyes, the oldest of the group took a step towards Harold and snatched the money from his hand. Come on, boys, he said. The other 3 followed his lead, glaring at Harold as they headed for the door. Sophie was waiting across the counter from his stool by the time Harold sat back down. You shouldn't have done that. That was more for me than it was for you, Harold said, slurping his now lukewarm coffee. I wasn't lying. I'm in no mood this morning. What if they're just not used to things here, he said. Can't blame them for following the work out west and experiencing a little culture shock, but that doesn't mean we have to put up with their Jim Crow attitude. He jutted his head towards the young man, who was unabashedly staring at him. I'll pick up his tab too, he told Sophie. It's the least I can do. The young man shook his head. How did you know? Harold grinned slightly as Sophie refreshed his mug. I've seen you in your uniform around Barrington Hall, he told him. You're V12, right? You're at Berkeley? He asked. Harold nodded. I've never seen you on campus. I don't get out much. You stay buried in the library? Harold chuckled. Hey, man, it's nothing I haven't seen before, the man said, a twinge of anger rising in his voice. You study hard and get a good job and stay home while we get fast-tracked to the Pacific. I get it. Look, Harold told the man with a sigh, I was in no mood to fight with them, and I'm in no mood to fight with you. Besides, I'm not an undergrad. I'm an associate professor working towards my PhD. Oh, really? Is that so? The young man teased. Same difference. Tell me, what do you teach, Professor? Physics, Harold said, but I haven't taught a class yet. Even better, he declared. What kind of professor gets to stay home and safe and doesn't even teach? He's a researcher, Sophie interrupted. He works at the Rad Lab. Her words sucked the air out of the diner. Oh, was all the young man could manage. Harold shrugged. He stammered, I'm sorry, Harold waved him off as he tipped the sugar over his mug, watching the white crystals pour into his coffee like a sweet waterfall. I'm Sean, the young man said, reaching out his hand. Harold shook it. Harold, you don't have to buy my breakfast. Harold smiled. I don't have to. I want to. Thank you for not causing a scene with those guys. It would have been more trouble than it was worth for Sophie, and I just couldn't have dealt with it right now. Can I ask you something? Sean slid over one stool. Some of us in V12, we've heard rumors about what you're working on at the Rad Lab. I'm sure you've had, Harold said with half a smile. Are they? He tried, but fear choked his voice. Is it true? Harold knew there was only one way he could respond. I'm sorry, Ensign, he said, but that's above your pay grade. Then he raised his coffee mug, so Sean slid back down his seat to retrieve his and clinked. Harold hadn't even noticed that Sophie had slipped back to the kitchen until she returned. He quickly produced a few singles from his wallet and asked, does this cover both our tabs? Child, she teased, pushing the money back towards him across the counter. You know that's way too much. Harold relented and stuffed half the bills back into his pocket. Hey, where's the nearest post office? He asked. Sophie looked at him with utter disbelief and just a hint of disappointment. You've been coming here 6 years and you don't know where the PO is? He shrugged. I've never needed it before, he explained. I've always done my mailing from campus. So what can't wait until you get back there? Harold swallowed hard and presented his upturned palms, and Sophie immediately understood that her last question would go unanswered. Go back to Aoki's and take a left, she instructed. 4 blocks down, take a right. At the second light, take another left. You'll find it at the next corner. Harold popped the last bite of corn muffin into his mouth and chased it with a slurp of coffee. Thank you, Sophie, he said, rising from the stool as soon as his mouth wasn't full. As always. She smiled at him. I'll see you in the morning after the next night you can't sleep. Yeah, he nodded. Yeah, you will. Then he turned to the young man. Take care, Sean. I hope to see you around campus. I hope so too, the young man replied. Thank you again for breakfast. Harold smiled and exited Sophie's with the same familiar chime. He could have stayed for hours, chatting with Sophie as she endlessly refilled his coffee mug. He had spent the better part of a day perched on one of her stools many times before. But he knew he couldn't do that today because the envelope had been burning a hole in his pocket the entire time he was at the diner. 3 blocks down after the left at Aoki's, Harold was relieved to find a small park. It certainly wasn't much, more or less a local garden, a few plots of flower beds at an intersection lined with benches, but the peaceful setting felt like a godsend. Harold took a seat and let the paltry foot traffic pass him without notice as he struggled with the same question that had consumed him for nearly a day. What am I going to tell Elsie? When no answer came, he yanked the envelope from his pocket and read her letter again. 2/15/44 to Dr. Harold Drexel, PhD, from Elsie Drexel, undergraduate internship. Dear Dr. Drexel, please consider this letter my official application to join your research team as an undergraduate intern next semester. Sincerely, your sister Elsie. And she'd written it on the back of her acceptance letter to Berkeley. Harold loved the fact that she'd addressed the letter to Dr. Drexel, even though he hadn't received his PhD yet. To her, it was just a loving term of endearment and encouragement, her unwavering belief that someday her big brother would get his thesis published. What she didn't know was that Harold could have written numerous papers to earn his doctorate, on his role on the discovery of plutonium or on any of their research with the new element since, except that all of his work had been embargoed by the government. He'd be allowed to publish someday, but certainly not when it could tip their hand to their enemies, or perhaps worse, to one of their allies. But again, what could he tell his little sister? That she shouldn't come to the best university in America that would have her? He'd been the smartest student in every class, and he recognized that she was at least 3 times smarter than he was. Princeton and Columbia were barely an hour from their house, but they and most of the Ivy League weren't co-ed. Their father was renowned as the best high school physics teacher in the state, yet her only path into the family business led west, a path she'd been desperate to take ever since visiting his sophomore year. Hell, even Dr. Lawrence and Dr. Seaborg had recognized her precocious mind and sent letters of recommendation to the admissions office. This had literally been years in the making. How on earth could he pull the rug out from under her now? But this simply wasn't the same place as the one he'd come to, or the one she'd visited a few years ago. UC Berkeley had become Annapolis West, a literal pipeline to send men like Sean overseas. And thanks to all the migrant workers from the South, Oakland, California had become Oakland, Mississippi. And that didn't even touch the fact that everyone who looked like the kind old couple who had regularly sold him fruit had been shoved into pens like cattle. And yet, to his own dismay, none of that was what bothered Harold the most. They had to win this war. Had to. Harold had no doubt about that. It was a genuine battle between good and evil, and Harold knew he was working on the side of good. But while it was one thing to fight fire with fire, it was another to fight fire with the biggest fireball the world would ever know. He barely recognized the radiation laboratory that he'd joined as an undergraduate anymore. Now, under the Manhattan Project, the Rad Lab raced Oak Ridge to be the first team to separate their isotopes and deliver them to Oppenheimer at Los Alamos. That was what kept Harold up so many nights. The knowledge that, no matter how necessary his work was, he'd have no answer at the pearly gates when he had to explain what he'd done. And even if his fingerprints were firmly on the most horrific thing humanity had ever created, he'd be damned before he'd let his sister join him. Harold stood back up and continued to follow Sophie's directions until he was standing in front of the post office. And while he still had no answer to the question that had been weighing on him like a millstone, the 5 and dime next door gave him one breath's respite when their display of local postcards in the front window caught his eye. There, staring at him through the glass, was a perfect photo of Campanile Tower on Berkeley's campus. Harold always felt that the 300-foot clock tower seemed to keep time for all those who wandered beneath it, like a peaceful guardian, even if he, himself, might have been cutting those minutes short. Harold slipped inside, snagged the postcard off the top rack of the display, and took it to the register. Even if he didn't know how he would write Elsie back, he knew that he should at least let his parents know that he'd received her letter. More importantly, he knew that mailing the postcard would force him to keep his word by the time the sun set into the ocean. "May I borrow a pen?" he asked once the transaction was complete. When the clerk obliged, he wrote an innocuous message to his parents. "Dear folks, just got a letter from Elsie today that I'm going to answer tonight. It took her letter a long time to get here this time. Love, Harry." Then he moved next door to the post office and dutifully waited in line for his turn at the counter. "Good morning," the mail clerk welcomed him. "How can I help you?" Resigned, he handed her the card. "I'd like to post this," Harold told her, "and I'll also need a sheet of stamps." That's it from 10 Word Tragedies from PS Publishing. Such an honor to be invited to contribute to that anthology. Thank you again, Chris Golden and Tim Lebin. This is to both of you.
That was really good. You have a wonderful speaking voice. You're a very good reader. On your website, there's a picture of you standing in front of a microphone, obviously reading something. Is it something that you naturally do? Do you do readings, or is it some other career?
Career, no. Readings, yes, and I love doing them, but I did theater as a kid.
Okay.
And I've always been, the nice way to say it's a performer, the more honest way is a bit of a ham. But I I love the performance aspect of it. I know there are, memes that always say if you find reading boring, you're doing it wrong. And I I do enjoy the performance aspect of getting to read my own work. If nothing else, I've heard these words this way so many times between my ears. It's nice to get to share what I've heard with other people.
Right, right. Do you I haven't asked this to too many people, too many authors, but there are some who are really good at reading their work. There's some who aren't. How do you think it's an important thing to really know how to read your work if you're up in front of people?
If you're up in, it can't hurt. I'll put it that way. And there are writers who more than naturally come to it. The name Chet Williamson jumps to mind. If anyone has ever seen Chet perform his own work, it's a joy to get to watch. Now, I mean, Chet, literally, you can look him up on IMDb. He is an accomplished actor, done film, done stage work. It's just, he's outstanding to watch. I've seen other writers at events who literally do this through the wonder of Zoom. Like they just want to, you can tell they're so uncomfortable. They just want to get off stage. Everything's monotone. They don't emote. They're reading at like, a 45 record played at 3 times the speed. It's not everyone can be Chet Williamson, myself included. In fact, no one else can be Chet Williamson. I should say that. But if you're going to be presenting yourself and your work, I do think it's a good idea to enjoy yourself and try to get into it. If you will excuse me, I can hear from across the room. Please ask your next question. But I have one dog in my bedroom who wants out and one dog outside the bedroom who wants to switch. So let me do their shift
Sure,
switch, and
sure.
I'll be right back.
All righty.
Go on, go ahead, go on, switch. Come on. You want to come in? No, you want to come in? Okay. Okay, the 70-pound dog just left and the 10-pound dog just arrived, and he'll be louder than she was. So
All right.
Yeah. He's gonna crash the party. Everybody say hi to Kai.
Oh, there we go.
This is Kai. Hey Kai, come on. No, you can't have my whiskey.
Yeah, maybe you can ask some questions too.
Please.
So your first published work was the Monochromes and Other Stories, was published in 2017.
First collection.
First collection.
First one with my name on the cover. Yes.
Okay. What are some of the other works that you did before that? When did you start writing?
My mom is here, and so I wish she was on to answer this question. I believe the first story I ever wrote was my take on a Batman episode. I believe it was called Batman and Robin and the Ruby Tubby, and I was 3 or 4 years old. But I do bring that up because I come from a family of writers, and anything creative was encouraged in my house, just wholeheartedly and full-throatedly. My parents were wonderful about that. So Mom, thank you. And so yeah, I remember, writing stories as a kid, and I just never stopped. As far as professionally, like going, the first story I ever had published was in fact in the Nikon 20 anthology in the year 2000. That was edited by my mentor, Bob Booth. And I recognize he gave me the chance and said, he said, I'm not just going to give you carte blanche, but if you write something and I think it's good enough, I'll include it in the anthology. And I wrote a story called The View from the Bottom which was a satirical retelling of my first Nikon experience. And there were a lot of inside or not so inside jokes of just having fun with other Nikoners and whatnot. And they say know your audience. Bob read it and loved it. He's like, oh yeah, I'm putting that in. So that was the first story that ever saw the light of day of mine.
Did you always write? When did you decide to write and really focus on the genre that you are in?
Well, when I pick a genre to focus on, I'll let you know. But
Okay.
but
What?
no, when I mean again, I'd say high school, college, as I was really like, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do. This is, and more than what I want to do, this is who I am.
What do you most like to write? What genre do you kind of fit most of your work into?
I'll say dark, fill in the blank. A lot of dark comedy, a lot of things that are kind of hey McIlvain, shameless plug, twisted. I it's in the some of the, like, I don't think it's on the back cover, but some of the copy that was written, promotional copy written for Monochromes, uses the tagline, some people just see the world differently. And I say that with pride, that I'm one of those people, and that I just, some of I've got a weird take on things, and I'm lucky that people have tended to find that take entertaining.
Did you does your past performing contribute to or work its way into your work?
It has to. It just has to, because I think all of us bring so much of ourselves, even parts we'd rather leave at the door, find their way into our work. I will say, I've been complimented many times on my writing of dialogue, that I am able to write dialogue the way people speak sometimes. And I think that ties directly into what you're talking about, of the oral and auditory tradition of theater, and of, it's not just what you say, but how you say it. I find myself very much, I know this is not the question you asked, but I find myself writing by ear. Like, I will write a sentence and then I'll read it, and then I'll read it again, and then I'll read it again until I can hear what comes next. And then I'll read those two sentences together until the next one comes. I find, like, my writing process, I'd spend more time rereading what I've just written until in getting into that type of a flow. And then I'll write something and it'll just be like a record scratch. Like, no, that doesn't fit. That word, that sentence construct, you had a rhythm going. It was, I don't want to say it was musical, but it was
Right.
there was a flow, and you just, stealing one of my own lines, just dropped a sledgehammer in the room. Boom, you lost it. We'll rework that sentence. Get back into the rhythm. Get back into the flow.
Yeah, we have another author in the store, a local author, who does very similar. She was very big into theater. She was writing screenplays or stage plays. She was a director and stuff too. So her writing is very lyrical, very musical, as yours, and you can tell by the way you read it. Who are some of your biggest influences, and who? Well, let's just start with that. Who are some of your biggest influences?
I'll start outside the horror genre, because I was late coming to the horror world, and again, I have Bob to thank for that. But especially growing up, in those formative teenage college type of years, love J.D. Salinger and love Joseph Heller. And I think you can see the Heller's influence of that, absurd is funny and utterly absurd is utterly funnier. Just inside the horror genre, I have to point to the late great Charles L. Grant. I love quiet horror. I love the I should go back in those teenage years. Hemingway was always big too. When I see the lineage that I find like quiet horror is minimalist horror. And Charlie once said he never described any of the monsters in his own novels because anything you could project from your own head would be scarier than something that he could put on a page. And I think that is, well, there's a reason he's a legend. I think that is such sage advice.
Yeah, some people are commenting that Joe Heller was a big one for them as well. Do you plan on writing a novel?
Working on it.
You are working on something. Do you want to give any hints to it, or?
Sure. I'd be happy to. And I attended Monday's event with Gregory Bastianelli and last night's event with Tony Tremblay. So I know some of the questions that you may have set up in the queue here. And sorry to cut this off at the knees. I actually signed up for NaNoWriMo for the first time this year, and I was doing great. And then Election Day happened. And then after that, just the day job world, I had a double deadline week the next week. And so I failed NaNoWriMo horribly, but I had 3 great days of progress there. And and this going back to something you asked Tony last night. You asked about, have you ever expanded a short story into a novel? There was a call for an anthology that then unfortunately the anthology never happened, but it was a mix of crime and horror. And I conceived of and came up with a story that I was going to write as a short story and send to this anthology. But one line that had been kicking around my head, and in particular, this main character that I had created for it, just wouldn't go away, wouldn't leave. And I realized, okay, that short story is actually the prologue to her story, which is a much longer tale. And my elevator pitch for it is it's a supernatural version of the Newman and Redford classic, The Sting. It's about demon hunters, but these demon hunters aren't Buffy the Vampire Slayer-esque going at demons with stakes and axes and swords. They're grifters, they're con artists, and you have to play the long con and trick and trap. And so basically the main character is, if this is giving away too much, anyone who's considering buying my novel, please don't not, because I'm about to say this. The one line that wouldn't leave me alone was from the prologue, is she alludes to, I used to work at this big company, but then figured, why make a bunch of rich old men even richer when I'm the one with the talent? And who she's talking about is the Vatican, that they were the ones who had this demon hunting team, and then she left and went out on her own. Well, they come back to her because they've got a job and a mark that they can't handle and they need her. And I will just leave it at that, because after that, like The Sting, it's an onion and I'm just peeling layers from there.
I just lost my question. So you had mentioned that well, let me ask this first. Is there a timeline or a time that you're shooting for to have this book out, this novel out?
No, because he was here and now I'm not seeing him on the screen. I hope you're still here, John McIlvaine. I have not forgotten that I owe you still another collection of short stories, and that I have not forgotten about that. That was has been on the docket for a number of years. but was paused for quite some time as I worked on the anthology that you mentioned earlier that we're going to dedicate some time to.
Yep.
Coming up here, the Dystopian States of America. I paused from that. I got DSOA to the finish line. And then, pardon my language, the fucking world ended. It was literally like the anthology's out, pandemic.
Yeah.
So that's still not a good enough that's no excuse whatsoever for not having written as much as I should have and aim to have this year. It's not a good excuse, but it's an understandable one, I think.
Well, your 3 days of NaNoWriMo writing is a lot better than my 3 minutes of it when I tried it last year.
Hey, anytime there are more words on the page than when you sat down, it was a successful session.
Right. So you mentioned that the way you write, I guess you would call it a pantser. I guess that's the term. Is that what you do? You write, then you read, you write, you read. You kind of go like that, or do you have an outline? Do you take notes and then kind of put them all together? And
I've tried them all, and I'd say I'm okay. Our great friend Bracken McLeod would look at my process and say, "Dear God, you're entirely a pantser." But we've talked. I mean, Bracken will write 100-page outline to write his novel. That literally the novel is just, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll write whole scenes in my outline, and then I'm just doing the connective tissue." I'm like, "That's not outlining, that's writing." But certainly I've scribbled notes in my days. Mostly I wind up the pantser method and just kind of going and kind of seeing where the story takes me. And undoubtedly there have been times where that has I've wound up writing myself into a corner, and then you have to be like, okay, I know where I want to go. How do I get there from here? And then you need to sit down and be like, okay, I could bridge like this, and actually outlining, giving myself notes. On the other side of things, in a confession that I'm sure will shock absolutely no one, I can't say how many times I may be out for an evening and suddenly a line or a bit of dialogue or something I've been working on, and I will wind up going home with cocktail napkins with notes scribbled on them because, ask the bartender, "Hey, can I borrow a pen?" Write down that line, be like, save it for later because you're not going to remember it by morning. So
right.
It's most I'm sure all the outliners in the crowd would say, "No, you're a pantser," and I will say that with pride. But even us pantsers have to make some plans sometimes.
Well, we'll continue on this line in a little while, but you had mentioned a little while ago about the dystopian states of America and Election Day. There is a comment here from Mick Upstill. Speaking of Election Day, are you surprised at how close to reality the plots of some of the dystopian states contributors came? So I'll let you answer that, and then if you want to go ahead and invite, and we'll get into that whole dystopian states that we had talked about earlier.
I wish I was surprised, but no, I'm not. This was, and I hope other people want to join this conversation who are involved in the project too. I'll only speaking for myself. I've found there was something very cathartic about this project, about taking things that were so real life horror. I mean, actually, you can't make this shit up type of horrific, and using it as a jumping off point for art, for stories, and but then also that next level of saying, but these are our warning flares of where we're headed. And we're going to use these stories that then were inspired from such a dark place to benefit the ACLU Foundation, to benefit such an essential and important cause that protects all of our civil rights. It really felt like making chicken salad out of chicken shit. And so I know, Mick, that wasn't exactly what you asked, but as far as was I surprised by how close to reality a lot of the DSOA authors came? I have to admit, all I have to say is we don't know a sliver of the whole truth yet. And I won't be surprised if more and more we find out about in the coming years. And we're like, oh, holy shit, she nailed that in here. She was ahead of the curve. He was ahead of the curve. They intuited, they felt. Dear God, I hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't think I am.
So before we invite a few of the people that you know who are attending here to maybe contribute a little bit to this part of the conversation, for those who don't know what it is, the Dystopian States of America, it's a charity anthology benefiting the ACLU Foundation. It is available at a Free Thinkers Corner and through our website. 15% of our sales of it goes to the ACLU. I believe all the proceeds, or a majority of the proceeds from your personal sales, goes towards.
All and to be clear, every author donated their story. All author royalties.
Yep.
Everyone is contributing to the ACLU Foundation.
It's an anthology featuring dystopian views of the future for America or the entire world, should the current regime remain in power. And of course, we know that it's potentially not going to happen. Talking about the three different branches, lobbying, donors, propagandists. Many have publicly stated that the reality we're currently living within is scarier and more surreal than anything of us have ever dreamt up. So this anthology provided the chance to take that ball and run with it. All proceeds from the book go to the ACLU Foundation. If you want to go ahead and call out, if you can see everybody who was in it, and you want to go ahead and call out their names as he calls your name, you can go ahead and unmute.
Here, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I do want to give a shout out to everyone who did contribute. So if I may, I'd like to read the names off the back cover of the book. And if you're here and if you feel like participating, no pressure on anyone. We trust you. You're all adults. Just hit the unmute and camera on buttons and please join the conversation. But I wanted to do this also because more so than any project I've been involved with, DSOA was a team effort. This was such a collaboration, and I am humbled and honored to have worked with the following authors, and I can't lie, it's a jaw-dropping lineup. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Linda Addison, Abby Bechtel, Brad J. Boucher, Natalie Bulkin, Dana Cameron, William D. Carl, G.D. Dearborn, Jeff Deck, Dan Foley, C.M. Franklin, Dawnjoy Gam, Christopher Golding, Justine Graken, Michelle Renee Lane, Tim Levin, Stephen Lomer, Jonathan Mayberry, Bracken McLeod, Billy Martin, Elizabeth Massey, John M. McIlvain, Hillary Monahan, James A. Moore, Eric A. Nunnally, K.L. Pereira, Michael Rowe, Kat Scully, Sheri Sebastian-Gabriel, Hildy Silverman, Lucy A. Snyder, Tony Tremblay, Josh Waterman, Rath James White, Chet Williamson, and some other guy. I'm kidding, Craig Wolf, who is here too.
Hey, Matt. What's up?
I know that voice very well.
Hey, man.
Hey, another guy here too.
First and foremost, for people who don't follow Craig on Facebook, how are you feeling, my friend?
Okay. Still waiting on the test to come back, but better than I felt yesterday.
Good.
Yeah.
So
Great.
I think what we can do is we can just kind of go one at a time, give everybody a couple minutes to talk about their contribution to the
Sure.
book. Does that sound all right? So, Craig, you're right next to my icon thing there. So why don't you go ahead and tell us maybe just a quick few-minute thing on who you are, your contribution to the book.
Yeah, Craig Wolf. I am a novelist and short story writer here in Oklahoma, and my contribution was a lighthearted piece. I thought I would offer up some comic relief to the anthology, which is that's tongue in cheek. It was a dark piece regarding climate change and school shootings and a strange alien intervention. I really took the speculative fiction element of the call for stories and ran with it, but very proud to have been a part of this project. I believe firmly in what the ACLU does, and I was in tall cotton with the writers that were involved with this. There were some great writers. And speaking only from my part in the process, Matt did a great job of really pulling out what was best in the story and bringing out the best in it. So it was a real pleasure, and it's a strong book.
Great, thank you. Hildy Silverman, welcome
Hi.
to A Free Thinker's Corner, a Frightmare Before Christmas. What's your take on dystopian states?
Well, first of all, I'll just say the obvious. It was an incredible honor to be included in a table of contents like this with such amazing other authors. And, you know, it's still a joy to pick up that book and see my name listed next to some of these folks, actually all of these folks. So it was a real thrill. I really appreciate that Matt reached out to me and allowed me to contribute. My story is called Divided We Fell, and I decided to take the angle of doing a quiet, intimate focus on characters with the world exploding outside around them while they're trapped together in their home, even though at this point they certainly do not want to be anywhere near each other. So it's funny how that was ahead of reality and what's going on now. And I can only imagine there's a few couples out there, 1 or 2 or 1,000, that are trapped together that wish they weren't.
Great, thank you. Jeff Deck, welcome. We have a few of Jeff's books in the story. He lives right across the border. What was your contribution?
Hey there. Yeah, so yeah, I just wanted to echo everyone else and just saying it was amazing how this book came together, and it's a real privilege to have a story in there with so many other wonderful writers, and Matt's edits to my story and suggestions were really great. He helped me come up with a better ending for the story that really popped. So I want to speak to Matt's skills as an editor as well as a writer. So my story was it's called Heart of Ice, capital ICE, and was about the agents of immigration and customs enforcement being kind of tasked with taking on these demons inside their bodies to help them sniff out undocumented people more efficiently. And it's kind of playing with this, playing in a sick way, I guess, with this like aliens versus demons dichotomy, because the unnamed president in the story keeps calling undocumented people aliens, and says that the only way he can fight them is with demons. And there's some satirical elements, some horrible stuff in there. Thankfully, we did not see demonic possession over the past 4 years, but since Trump has not yet left the White House, I really don't want to say anything for sure yet.
Well, thank you. Tony Tremblay, he was our guest last night on our Frightmare series. Before you start, though, if you mention Christopher Golden's name, he sent me an email saying that if you mention his name tonight, that I have to start sending him what you call it,
Oh,
yes.
my glass started
Well, of
off.
course, we got a drink though, right? Because we mentioned his name.
I had this much in the glass before the night, started. Now it's down to here. So we can't talk about Chris anymore. Oh shit.
I love being a bad influence on everyone.
You're doing a great job being a bad influence on everyone. I talked a lot last night. I don't have to talk a lot now, but
we didn't touch on it though, so I completely forgot about it. My bad. Go ahead and if you wanted to mention what your contribution was.
Well, it was funny because after we were done, Matt sent me an email and said, "Why didn't Chris even mention anthology? Because I'm so heartbroken." I said, "You got to give Chris a break. We'll be talking about it tomorrow." Yeah, look at it. But he was fine after that. I calmed him down.
Thank you.
Yep. So, no, my story is called Fake News. It's about a couple of journalists, 3 or 4 journalists that go on a cruise that the president has set up to essentially give interviews, one-on-one interviews with all these fancy journalists, top-notch journalists. But of course, the president being who he is, there's an ulterior motive in it, and things do not turn out anywhere near like these journalists think they're going to turn out, and it comes out very bad. But I do want to thank Matt for allowing me to be part of it. Did a great job. It's a wonderful idea, and what a great cause. So thank you, Matt, again for having me be part of it.
Hey, thank you. Tomorrow night is Sheri Sebastian-Gabriel. She's joining us here as well. I believe she's Matt's wife. Would you like to say something about your contribution?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to tomorrow night. I just want to echo Hildy and saying that I'm so honored to have, had my story in a TOC with so many amazing names, a lot of whom are here with us. So thank you again, Matt. My story is called Revolt, and it's about experiments being done on children who are held in cages, immigrant children who were stolen from their parents, and the US government decides to experiment on them. It's a cyberpunk story, and as I'll mention tomorrow, I really kind of got my start in writing in science fiction. So that's kind of, my first love was sci-fi. And I really wanted to kind of take, a different take on horror. And I think that a lot of cyberpunk does take a kind of dystopian tactic sometimes. So that was kind of the inspiration for Revolt, my tale. But again, I'm so honored to have been in this amazing anthology, and again, it's for a great cause.
Great, thank you. John McElveen, did you like to come on and say something?
Yes, I'm glad you corrected the pronunciation there.
Much like the Hair Club for Men, he's not just a contributor, he's also the publisher.
Something like that, yes. So Matt kind of pulled a fast one on me on this one because I, as a rule, don't want to put stories in books I publish as far as anthologies, but because of the ACLU, I said, well, I pretty much have to put a story in this. But it was really a fun project. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I was because it was a charity anthology, people tend to throw a lot of trunk stories and different things into these kind of anthologies. And I was very surprised, very pleased, pleasantly surprised that the quality of these stories and that, these were, very succinct with the dystopian states, the image and what Matt wanted to do with this anthology. And so, as a publisher, you're a little wary at first, but this was just an absolutely wonderful all the way through how it worked out. That being said, my story is, of course, as many of my stories, it revolves around a daughter, but it's about a young girl and a society in the not too distant future where children are basically their youth, their innocence is extracted from them, and they are given a opportunity. The only opportunity really to improve is to become militant and to have a goal of becoming what they call front runners, where they actually protect people with carrying a gun. And so this young woman is learning to be, or she's trying to get up to the grade of an F3, which is the highest level of a front runner.
That was a good story.
I didn't hear that.
Oh, I forgot I'm on mic. I'm sorry.
All right.
It was a good story, John.
Oh, thank you. Well,
Good that you're
anyways,
complimenting him with the mic on.
yes. So, and what also happens in here is that the bond between a parent and a child is pretty much severed, and they become more of that becomes militant as well, where the parents have become their leaders instead of their parents in military fashion. And you can see the innocence leaving in this young lady as sadly, I can't remember her age in this. I think she was 13. Yeah, and you can see as she's moving on, her innocence is leaving, and she, slowly merges into becoming, more focused on becoming the best soldier she can. So.
Great, thank you. Linda Addison has joined us. She can't get the video working, but she is here. So Linda, tell us about your contribution.
Yeah.
Did you select the video? Oh, sorry.
Well, I mean, I clicked it, but it says it says it can't start because the host has stopped it. All right, that's okay. I ain't gonna take that personal.
Oh,
well, I like your face.
Give me just a second here. Let me find you.
It's okay.
There we go. And ask to start video. There you go.
I was gonna say,
welcome.
Everybody knows what I look like. Hi,
guys. Hey, Linda. Hey. So good to see you.
Yes, it is.
It's good to see all of you. And Craig, I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well, buddy. But
I'll get better. I promise.
Good.
How are you feeling, Linda?
Do that thing. I'm good. I'm dealing with some post-viral fatigue, but it's workable. So I'm dealing with it. So this book, honestly, stop it. It's so amazing. And I love on the back you say, this is not our future. Like, that's wishful thinking under best of circumstances. Somebody says something about demons not happening yet. I'm sorry. Somebody in this country has been doing the work of the devil overtime, full-time for a while now. So anyway.
Yeah, here's to that. Yeah.
My story is called Artificial Unintelligence. And it's about a retired woman who's trying to get her benefits, and the whole benefit system has been changed into an automated computer system. And there's one letter difference in the name that was entered in her name. I used to do computers. That's all it takes, folks. One letter, one space. I'm just saying. And the hell she goes through, that it also includes SWAT teams trying to get her stuff straightened out because she can't get to a real person. And again, I'm sure nobody's had that problem, right? Where talk to a real person with a problem. So Matt, this book is wonderful and incredible. You did a great job. I was so honored you asked, and just pleased to be in part of it. All the stories are really quite wonderful.
Oh, if I may, a lot of you paid me kudos to how this book came out. I just like to say it's really easy to cook when you've got the right ingredients. And this book is because of all of you and I can't do math this quickly in my head, about 30 or so other contributors who aren't here tonight. You all made my job so easy and so fun and so heartbreaking and terrifying and everything that you guys rock. So thank you. It is not just thank you all so much.
Great. Well, thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, if you don't mind, this is the first time I've had like a panel of contributors, and I'd like to cop to something and then ask everybody this. My own story that's in here is a little bit of background. This project was originally started by Brad Boucher, who contributed a story because I twisted his arm and said when things got away from him and he was going to pull the plug as the editor, and I said, please pass the baton to me. Let this project needs to see the light of day. And I said, and contribute a story while you're at it then. The story that I wrote, he originally accepted, was about a teacher in the not too distant future where all of the education system is now for profit and in this very just different world. And when she realizes that she has a student in her first grade class who is a gifted child, needs to be challenged, needs to be nurtured, essentially. The topic I wound up writing about was rewind to race. Let me just ask this: how tough was it to write your stories? Because I mean, we have a lot of things that cut real close to the bone here. And Mac, you were talking about daughters and the loss of innocence. Sheri, you're talking about kids in cages. Hildy, you're talking about one relationship as a metaphor for the world falling apart. And bringing all this up also because there is an author who will remain nameless, but boy, she would have fit into this TOC like a glove. And I reached out to her and she was like, absolutely, I can't wait to contribute. And a month later, she wrote me back and said, I'm so sorry. Every time I sit down to work at my story, I have an anxiety attack. I physically can't do this right now. So of course I said, please, I don't want you to make yourself sick, literally, but you guys all made it through. How tough was it writing these stories?
Well, I'll start. I don't want to run over anybody, but as you know, mine was a reprint. So, when I first wrote it, it was a direct inspired by the fact that I am retired and I know how funky computer systems could be. And my thought of just how uncaring and the future will become if all our lives are ruled by computers and not people. And so the concept really was inspired by that. I feel the pain of that person who couldn't write, because this year's been real hard. It's been hard emotionally, energetically, for me, physically. So creating much of anything has been a big journey, but it just felt right when you asked me, and I begged to please let me put this reprint in, and you accepted it. I appreciate it.
And it's fine. I should say that was originally published in How to Recognize a Demon Has Become Your Friend, which was first put out by Econ eBooks back in the day. And and back then, I remember that story, and I thought it was funny. Boy, it's not as funny anymore.
It just takes a few years to change things, doesn't it? But yeah. The Nikon team, you and Jill and the love of my heart, Bob. You guys knocked it out the park with that book, and I was happy to have that story in this one.
All right, well, I can jump in here.
Easily.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a jerk here, but I wrote the story in 2 nights. But I find things so much easier to write when you're facing, when you're really facing the story you're writing. The world we're living in now is really disturbing. So I find it kind of easy to write something really disturbing because you don't have far to go to find the fodder. Also, where I work, there are armed soldiers, armed military when you drive in or drive out, and it's amazing, how they have to stay very staunch and, strong. And one of my things I would do is try to get them to crack a smile when I go into work every day. And it's very noticeable how sober they've become over the last 4 years. And that was a big, what's the word I'm looking for? That inspired a lot of the story. It's how sober everything is becoming. And so, it wasn't hard to write the story. It was hard emotionally. As a writer, it came out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would have to say that much like Mac, my story was, I think it flowed out of me. And I think that came from a place of anger. I think when it's that situation where you're really angry and you're having an argument with somebody and you think you're done, and then you're just like, but you know what really gets me? And you just keep coming back to that place of anger where you just don't want to let it go. I didn't want to stop writing Revolt because I was just so, I think, angry that I just had to get all of that out. So in terms of how difficult was it to write the story? Not at all. In some ways, I think it was just hard to kind of hold myself back a little. It's kind of like when you're in that place of anger and someone needs to like pull you back.
Yeah, I did find my anger increasing as I wrote. And I don't know if that's true for everyone here, but just that at the state America is in now. And as I was writing the story, what was it, 1.5 years ago now? Almost 2 years.
Right about that, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not an angry guy, but lately I have been, and I don't like the change.
No, you're Bruce Banner from the old Incredible Hulk show. Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me. I'm angry.
Well, the anger thing resonates for me because while everything was happening on the outside, there were things happening in my personal life, or had just happened not long ago, that caused a lot of anger and really had to kind of get out. It's not healthy to carry all that around. I know that. That said, sitting down and just kind of vomiting it onto the page and getting it out and dealing with it, I found pretty cathartic. So while I have had some challenges writing during the pandemic, this was obviously before, at that point, I think it had to come out so much that it flowed without too much difficulty.
Okay, well, if I may take this, while we got everybody here in a slightly different direction, outside of the people in this Zoom chat, what were some other stories in the anthology that struck a chord with you?
The one that really jumped, am I muted?
No, you're good. You're good.
The one that jumped out at me was Greg Dearborn's Pigs, I think it was. that story, I had to put the book down and walk away. I just had to. It's profoundly upsetting story. Lot of good stories in there though. But that was the one where I said I've got to step aside.
There's a story I read. I didn't read anything from the Dystopian States yet. It's definitely on my pile to do. Before I get to that, there was one comment though that honestly, DSOA is, in my opinion, one of the most disturbing books since Orwell's 1984.
That was Mick. Thank you, Mick.
Yeah, that was a comment.
That's
But
a compliment.
going to the disturbing thing, which as I was reading it, and I mentioned this last night to Tony, is Tender is the Flesh. Came out a few years ago. It's an Argentinian writer, and it was very, very disturbing. Not typically something I would read, but it brought up a lot of moral issues of factory farming, the way factory farming is today, how the poor are treated. And it was just one thing that I could see things going in kind of that direction. But it was, it was one of those things that I really wanted to put down, but I just couldn't. It just kept me, the writing was superb. So, if you can kind of stomach real dystopian, it's kind of like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. It's descriptive. He was descriptive in his telling of the meatpacking industry and how they slaughtered the cows and all that kind of stuff. While this has to do with animals and more so though humans, and the poor and the destitute and how they're treated. So I just throw that out there if anybody's interested in reading that book, because I found it very.
This is 2 nights in a row you've given that book a shout out, and you haven't been able to remember the author's name either time, dude.
Well, it's not that I can remember it. It's pronouncing it.
Oh. Okay.
So go ahead and continue, and I'll pull it up and I'll pronounce, and I'll figure out how to pronounce it.
Or write it in the chat.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add really quick off the track that Matt's trying to keep us on. I wanted to give a shout out, as always, to Matt and John and the whole publishing team for creating a table of contents that's so inclusive. I mean, you can't even begin to think of how many times I've been asked in interviews, how's that made? How's that done? And, it takes mindfulness. And there's a wonderful mindfulness, which if there wasn't, I would have to slap somebody because I'd be expecting that. But it's good to see it there. It's good to see it activated.
If I may, my sister, who is a contributor, was here, but put in the chat that, for family reasons, she had to go. When we put the DSOA website up and the contributors page, and she looked at it and she immediately called me, and she's like, just seeing all these faces, seeing these different faces. So she's like, this is us. This is how we're going to win this battle, is all of us together like this. And it was part and parcel with I mean, thank you, and thank again all of you for this. It was very important to all of us that this book include all of our voices.
Great.
Well, thank you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your contribution to the book and to this. Is there anything else you wanted to add to it, or?
Yeah,
I would like to say thank you, Chris.
Yeah, anyone final thoughts here you'd like to share on the anthology? And please don't ask me to do a sequel yet.
Well, hopefully we won't have to.
Right.
Actually, Yeah, you know what? I just said that, and I had this line in my back pocket for like a week and almost forgot to say it. So all I say is yes, election night went, thank God, the way or election week, I should say, went the way I was hoping it would go. 81 million of us stood up in one voice and
Yep.
told the regime to burn crops. But 74 million people in this country voted for an autocrat.
Mhm.
This work is not done.
No.
And I think if you take democracy for granted, it can be taken from you. So please, if this book is not your cup of tea, that's fine. But contribute to the ACLU. Get involved at a grassroots level. Don't get lulled into a sense of autopilot that things are just as they are and they're never going to change, because that's when things can get really dangerous. And we need to stay vigilant.
Yeah, I'll just throw in that one of the reasons beyond the incredible table of contents that I was so pleased to be a part of this was that the money was going to the ACLU. As you know, someone who's been fairly active in the free thinker atheist community and fighting for people's civil rights, it was just really nice to be able to contribute in some other tangible way, anything possible, because they do such incredible work.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. And so we'll continue with the interview with Matt. If you want to go ahead and mute all your things, just so that things don't get talked over. But before we continue, though, the book is by Agustina Maria Basterica. It was originally published in 2017. So back to
back to me to close, because I had one more very short story that I wanted to end with, and I wanted to personally dedicate it to a dear friend who apparently couldn't make it tonight. So I hope she watches the recording on Facebook Live, because Melissa Sherlin, this is for you. And I know I speak for all of us in this community. You are more than a friend, you are family, and we love you. And I'd just like to read the short story from Monochromes, Before Parachutes, and say, Melissa, this is for you tonight. Should have gotten a bookmark, sorry. Old Luke's business began shortly after the Wright brothers, but well before the term skydiving was ever coined. The first year or so were lean, so lean that Luke still crop dusted in his spare time and rented out the extra space in his hangar for storage. Then came Jake. After Jake, Luke's fortune was set. Jake's legend was such that Luke did good business after parachutes hit the scene, and the fatality rate for people jumping out of planes plummeted. Jake didn't need no parachute, Luke would say and beam at the bar, the bourbon stinging the nicks in his infected gums. He had a banner of those words printed and hung it from outside his awning outside his office. He tripled his average business the week it went up. Luke was careful about the customers he took on. No drunks were allowed to sign up for his flights. An impeccable mental health history was mandatory. And of course, there were the waivers. Unlike you, Luke would joke as a passenger signed on, I have to have a safety net. When a customer didn't laugh, Luke knew he would probably back out. This isn't to say old Luke was a stickler. In fact, he made all the allowances he could for his customers in good faith. He'd schedule their flights for whatever time they desired to jump, be it sunrise, sunset, high noon, or dead of night. He'd let his customers bring friends to keep them company. Once a man brought a reverend to administer last rites. Another time a man brought a hooker. That story went over best late night at the bar. One of the last flights he piloted, shortly before the stroke left him paralyzed on his left side and forced him into early retirement, Luke brought his nephew Harold for the ride. Harold was a plain and meager boy who Luke always knew would amount to much more. Someday, he promised the boy, when I shuffle off this earth, I'm leaving you the old bag of bolts. Then he kissed the plane's propeller. He always kissed his plane after he insulted it in public, like some men do their wives. This is it, Luke called to the customer, a man of about 40 who'd lived entirely too boring a life. You can jump anytime in the next 2 minutes. After that, I got to veer off, or else I'll run face first into the mountains and I'll have a whole mess of disappointed people down below. Luke tried to tussle Harold's hair, even though he wore a buzz cut, including this tack's parents. The man standing on the wing flinched, suddenly clenching one of the supports with white knuckles. Tell me again about Luke, he pleaded. What's to tell? Old Luke called back. He made it. Leapt off that wing right where you're standing, fell thousands of feet to that earth you were perched over, and then walked into town to thank me for the thrill of his life. You've seen the picture of us afterwards, right? The man nodded. It was the greatest day of my life, and I can't even begin to imagine how Jake felt, excuse me. Luke looked back and winked at him. Harold turned to study the altimeter, and when the boy looked back, the man was gone. Another satisfied customer, Luke bragged, patting his nephew on the knee. I tell you, boy, there's nothing like servicing the people and knowing you've done a job well. Harold swallowed hard. Don't you ever feel bad, Uncle Luke? Luke produced his hip flask and took a swig, a tradition upon making a drop. What for? He asked. For killing all those people. Luke turned to face his nephew. Harold, he said with the solemnity of death in his voice, I ain't killing nobody. Life kills enough people as is. Me? I'm just giving them one hell of a ride out. But you know they're going to die, Harold stammered. Old Luke grinned with whatever teeth he had left. Not necessarily, my boy, not necessarily. Oh, come on, Uncle Luke, Harold scoffed. I'm a little old to believe in Jake. Everyone knows that picture was taken before he jumped. Luke raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? Just who fed you that whopper? All the guys at school. They say you're nothing but a carnival barker with a plane. Luke skimmed the clouds with his plane's belly. Do you believe him? He asked. Harold looked at his feet. I don't want to. Why don't you want to? Harold grinned. Because I do believe in you. Luke's smile overtook his entire chin. That's what I like to hear, my boy. That's what I like to hear. So could you tell me again about Jake? Harold asked. Not too much to tell, Luke said. He always loved the mystery that surrounded the legend. He was an average man. Not too tall, not too short, not too skinny or fat. He never gave a reason for signing up. Call me a romantic, but personally, I like to think he had a broken heart. He was a quiet guy, never said much to me one way or another. It was just me and him on that daybreak flight. When the time came, he thanked me, stepped out on the wing, and jumped. I've heard people say he landed in a lake, Harold interrupted. He could have. Or that trees broke his fall. Could have. Harold studied his uncle. You don't wonder? Luke shook his head vigorously. Not in the least. So what happened when he came back? Harold loved the end of this story. Well, you see, Luke fired up his showmanship charm. That's the darndest part of the whole shindig. I was sitting at the saloon 10 nights later, partaking of a fine cocktail, when Jake walks through the front door. The whole place goes dead. Silent. Quiet as a deaf mouse. Luke drew his words out in a dramatic, hushed voice. Everybody knows this was my last customer come walking back after I dropped him off at the pearly gates. I shot off my stool, but I just stood there, staring, just like everybody else in the joint. Jake walks up to me, not looking at anyone else, and shakes my hand. That's when that barkeep snapped the famous photograph of the two of us. What'd he say, Uncle Luke? He said, thank you. Luke's voice trailed off in reverence. He said, thank you, old Luke. You were right. It was the greatest thrill of my life. Then he turned back around and walked out. The two sat in the glow of Jake's legend for a long while. And no one's seen him since, huh? Harold confirmed. Not a pair of eyes I've met. Where do you think he went? Luke smiled and slurped from his flask. Call me a romantic, he said, but I like to think he went back and mended that broken heart of his. Lived happily, happily ever after. And you really don't care how he did it? Harold asked. I never said that, old Luke pointed out. I said I never wondered. It took a second for it to sink into Harold. You know how he did it, he yelled. Luke smiled at his nephew. Of course I do. He nodded, letting the boy in on his best guarded secret. I've always known. How'd he do it? You really want to know? The old pilot teased. Of course I do, Harold begged. Everyone wants to know how Jake did it. The thing is, I always knew. I knew long before I ever met Jake, and long, long before Jake ever became a legend. It was why I started my business in the first place. Uncle Luke, just tell me, Harold pleaded. Old Luke smiled like a bear trap as he finally let someone in on his great secret. The thing is, he explained, a person can survive anything. If I may, I'd like to thank everyone here tonight. Chris, I imagine you want to too?
Yep.
If I may also just shamelessly pimp myself out, and John McElvain can act as a reference here. On my website, matt-bechtel.com, you can also find a portfolio page. I still do graphic design, websites, freelance copywriting, essential creative hired gun. Anyone interested in or in need of any of such talents, please, please, please contact me. I'm always looking for more work.
Matt is he does the Haverhill House website as well. So you can get a good look at his work there.
He's done my website also.
Maybe I'll have to hire you to do my website because that's a pain in the neck.
There you go.
But
should have just asked before we went live, but.
Thank you very much. That was a great ending.
Thank you.
This, Matt's books, of course, are available through his website. They're also available through bookshop.org. We highly encourage everybody to use that. They support local bookstores. Buy everything purchased through them. Goes into a small portion, goes into a small pot for all the bookshops that are affiliated with them. If you use our particular link to them or another bookstore close to you, they have a link to them. A bigger chunk of that purchase goes directly to that bookstore. So it's a competitor to that shall not be named. But they support, I'll say it, they support us, Amazon doesn't. So, and of course, Dystopian States is available through our website and in store as well. Tomorrow night, Sheri Sebastian-Gabriel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. You took the words right out of my mouth. Here's Spirits. It's sitting on the upstairs desk next to me this whole time because I know she was doing a test read earlier today. Everybody here, I expect to see you there tomorrow night. She is not just the best writer, but the best person I know. And I don't even want to think of who I'd be or where I'd be without you, my love. Thank you so much. Everybody else, thank you. But my beloved, I do not have the words. I never will, but I'll spend the rest of my life looking for them. I love you.
Very nice. Very nice. Yep. Thank you again. And we'll see you again, hopefully, everybody, 7 o'clock tomorrow night.
See you tomorrow night, gang.